Welcome to the Steady Anchor Podcast, a podcast on Christian faith and practice, highlighting doctrine and discipleship in the local church. I'm Luke, and welcome to the show. Welcome back to the Steady Anchor Podcast. I am Luke, your host. Today we are going through Proverbs chapter 25. Sorry for the late post. There were some difficulties yesterday, but today I'll be posting yesterday and today's videos and preparing for the rest of the week, so you won't have this problem again. So again, we are going through our study of the book of Proverbs, now at chapter 25, where we spend about 10 minutes a day studying through the chapter, reading it, listening, and seeking for those prominent themes, those words of wisdom, to try and get a better picture of how to live in a way that is honoring to God, to live in a way of wisdom, of righteousness, of insight, of purity, of holiness. This is the things that we're looking for. This is what we want to develop in ourselves. So that being said, going into Proverbs chapter 25 in the ESV. These also are the Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied. It is the glory of God to conceal things, but the glory of kings to search things out. As the heavens for height and the earth for depth, so the heart of kings is unsearchable. Take away the dross from the silver, and the smith has material for a vessel. Take away the wicked from the presence of the king, and his throne will be established in righteousness. Do not put yourself forward in the king's presence, or stand in the place of the great, for it is better to be told, "Come up here," than to be put lower in the presence of a noble. What your eyes have seen, do not hastily bring into court. For what will you do in the end, when your neighbor puts you to shame? Argue your case with your neighbor himself, and do not reveal another's secret, lest he who hears you bring shame upon you, and your ill repute have no end. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. Like a gold ring or an ornament is a wise reprover to a listening ear. Like the cold of snow in the time of harvest is a faithful messenger to those who send him. He refreshes the soul of his masters. Like clouds and winds without rain is like a man who boasts of a gift he does not give. With patience a ruler may be persuaded, and a soft tongue will break a bone. If you have found honey, eat only enough for you, lest you have your fill of it and vomit. Let your foot be seldom in your neighbor's house, lest he have his fill of you and hate you. A man who bears false witness against his neighbor is like a war club or a sword or sharp arrow. Trusting in a treacherous man in time of trouble is like a bad tooth or a foot that slips. Whoever sings songs to a heavy heart is one who takes off a garment on a cold day, and like vinegar on soda. If your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat, and if he is thirsty, give him water to drink. For you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. The north wind brings forth rain, and a backbiting tongue angry looks. It is better to live in a corner of a housetop than in a house shared with a quarrelsome wife. Like cold water to a thirsty soul, so is good news from a far country. Like a muddied spring or a polluted fountain is a righteous man who gives way before the wicked. It is not good to eat much honey, nor is it glorious to seek one's own glory. A man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls. This is the word of our Lord. So we have here in Proverbs chapter 25 a continuation of the Proverbs of Solomon. Now it gets into the patch of Proverbs of Solomon that it says in the first verse were copied down by Hezekiah, king of Judah's scribes. That sometime down the road in the putting together of these book of Proverbs, some of the Proverbs of Solomon were taken from the scribes of King Hezekiah and added to the book. We have a couple of things here, more repeated themes, some prominent images, 6 through 7, that we should be humble in the presence of a king. We shouldn't go into the king's presence and assume a place of authority. It's like the parable that Jesus speaks that when you go to a feast, it's in the book of Luke, when you go to a feast, don't assume yourself the best seat. Don't automatically go to the head of the table and take a seat for yourself. Just get comfortable. But instead, be humble. Be aware of your circumstances. Don't assume that you're automatically going to get the place of highest honor. Because if you assume the highest seat and your guest, the person who invites you, your host, or the king in this circumstance, says, "What are you doing? The seat's not for you," and moves you down, then you'll be disgraced. But if you are humble and place yourself in a normal average seat, if you're not seeking the greatest spot, then you'll be rewarded. It's better to sit in a place of humility and be raised up to a place of glory than it is to assume a place of glory and be humbled to a place of humility. So it's better to do that on our own. 11, a word at the right time is like a golden ornament. It's like apples of gold and settings of silver, this kind of old imagery, like a gold ring or an ornament, a word fitly spoken, like it's a word at just the right moment. You may have a memory of a time that you were suffering, a time that you were worried or anxious, a time where life was not going well, or you just didn't know what to do, what to say. But a friend had the right word for the moment, the right encouragement, the right correction, the right information, a word fitly spoken. It's like an apple of gold. It's like a rich ornament. It's a blessing. Verse 17, it's important not to overstay your welcome. Let your foot be seldom in your neighbor's house, lest he have his fill of you and hate you. So it's not a message like never go over to visit your neighbors, but rather to make yourself scarce when you need to. In the same way that we shouldn't assume the high place in the seat of the king, neither should we assume that everyone wants us to be with them all the time. You don't want to overstay your welcome because that will burden your neighbor and cause them to not like you. It'll be contrary to your purposes. So it's better to have people saying, "Man, that person's a lot of fun. We should have them over more often." That is better than saying, "Man, that person never leaves." It's like they just don't know when to end a conversation and see themselves out. Let's see, verses 21 through 22. Feed your enemies and trust the Lord. This is one that is prominent for me. It's also quoted in Romans chapter 12, which is one of the passages that I've preached on a couple of times. If your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. For you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. Now, why does that sound like a good thing? Why should we heap burning coals on people's head? Well, the intention of the passage here is that hopefully by doing good to your enemies, hopefully in returning good for evil, that your enemy, your adversary, will realize that they are themselves are in the fault. Hopefully, like imagine you're in a supermarket and the cashier is getting yelled at by this angry dude behind the counter and he's stomping his fists and stuff and he's screaming at her. But the cashier is remaining calm and collected and just trying to resolve the situation. You would be like, okay, she's doing her job to trying to solve the situation. He's just making things a lot worse. So in the same situation, hopefully, we as Christians will have the patience to respond calmly and caringly to when people persecute us, so that hopefully they will see that they are in the wrong, feel convicted by it, feel that warm heat of like realizing you're doing something wrong, and the Lord will bring reconciliation. It's a reward for us. But there's a lot more in that verse that we can get into later. Verse 24, a rooftop bed is better than a quarrelsome wife. It's another proverb that's repeated in a number of different ways, but it's better to live outside in the weather and the bare elements than it is to live inside the house with a wife who is quarrelsome. So be wise with who you spend your life with. Be wise with who you date. Be especially wise with who you want to marry. Well, that's our episode for today. We hope that this blessed you. If it did, please share with a friend or recommend to someone else. We hope that this blesses your day. We'll see you tomorrow.